Yes, our next panel this morning is post-secondary education for incarcerated individuals, which I'm thrilled about. We're doing some of that work in the state of Michigan, really impressed with the results. So looking forward to hearing what they have to share. Our facilitator will be Allan Wachendorfer, and the panelists include Addie, Kary from the U.S. Department of Education, Kary Bosma from Hope College, which is in Michigan, and Mosier, president of the Kansas Community College. Allan Wachendorfer is program manager with Vera's Unlocking Potential initiative, working to expand access to high-quality post-secondary programs in prison across the nation. He helped lead Vera's bipartisan efforts across the last 3 administrations, including helping to pass the legislation President Trump signed into law in 2020, providing Pell Grants for prison education programs. Addie is the director of the Office of Correctional Education and the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education at the U.S. Department of Education. His work at ED includes serving as an agency expert on correctional and reentry education, administering adult and juvenile correctional and reentry education programs, and coordinating inter and intra-agency efforts pertaining to correctional and reentry reentry education. Kary Bosma is co-director of the Hope Western Prison Education Program, which provides a service-based liberal arts bachelor's degree to incarcerated students in Michigan. Ms. Bosma's program emphasizes not only ensuring careers for people leaving prison, but also opportunities for people to change the culture within prisons, making them safer and more rehabilitative. And finally, Mosier, president of Kansas City, Kansas Community College, KCKCC. Glad I don't have to say that too often. Since 2018. It leads an institution recognized for its innovative programs, particularly in correctional education. KCKCC has collaborated with correctional facilities for decades, offering associate degrees and certificates at the Fort Leavenworth U.S. Discipline Barracks since 1985, and at the Joint Regional Correctional Facility since 2010. Through the Second Chance Pell Grant pilot program. KCKCC has introduced a professional welding certificate and is expanding to offer a GED program at Lansing Correctional Facility. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator.
All right, here we go. It's just like when you testify in the legislature and everybody always forgets to hit that button. Welcome. Thank you, Rep. Glanville, and thank you, MEC, for inviting us to be here. I'm really excited to be with you all and be able to offer some of this information. This panel is essential today because it highlights the transformative role that education can play in the lives of incarcerated people, their families, and their communities. Particularly in the Midwest, where access to post-secondary education and training can lead people to good jobs and to support their families and not end up back in prison. As our region faces workforce shortages and economic challenges, programs like those led by our panelists are not only providing valuable skills, but also fostering safer, more rehabilitative prison environments. So today, we'll hear from these leaders in correctional education who are pioneering efforts to make educational opportunities more accessible, impactful, and aligned with the needs of our communities. Today I'll cover a little bit of an overview of the current landscape, just a couple slides in the historical context, but then we'll move into a discussion with our panelists that includes why this population of learners and workers is worth the investment, what's working well, what is needed to help these systems work more effectively with one another to support incarcerated learners and workers. So I believe I just hit this, awesome. So first, just a little bit about my organization. The Vera Institute of Justice is a national nonprofit organization that works closely with government partners and community partners to implement more effective practices across the criminal legal system across the country. So we work on a lot of different touch points with the criminal justice system, from the front end all the way to the back, with people trying to find housing and employment and things like that. But my work specifically focuses on expanding access to post-secondary education opportunities for people that are in prisons, state and federal prisons across the country. And we were, as noted, we were the lead organization that helped to work with Congress to lift the ban for people in prison to be able to access Pell Grants to help pay tuition for these opportunities. Just want to touch on a few data points before we get into our conversation. The first is reducing recidivism. This is a really important piece of corrections work. It's a factor that they consider, obviously, for obvious reasons. And what we know from pretty extensive research out there is that people who participate in post-secondary education opportunities while they're in prison have a 48% lower odds of returning to prison than those who do not participate. This leads to safer communities. People are committing fewer crimes, and it actually leads to a lot of taxpayer savings as well, because for every dollar we're investing in these programs has a $4 return on that investment just from reduced incarceration costs alone. Number three, you all have been talking a lot about this, I'm sure, with the demographic cliffs, the aging workforce, declining birth rates. This suggests that employers are struggling to find skilled workers, and this is a huge, huge population of untapped talent that if we can help skill them up, they can fill these roles and help meet the demands of our labor market and strengthen our local economies. Unfortunately, the unemployment rate for people who are leaving prison is significantly high. It's 27%, which exceeds that of the national population during the Great Depression. It's a pretty staggering number. Another staggering number is that 60% of people leaving prisons are jobless for the first 4 years. And if you couple that with the fact that 70% of all jobs in the US require some post-secondary education and training beyond high school, those two things together make it even more important that we help provide these opportunities to people to help improve our employment rates and increase people's wages so they can support their families. Another thing we'll talk about a little bit today is facility safety. We know through research that prisons that have these types of programs have fewer violent incidents, which makes a safer working environment for people who work in prisons. And there are staffing shortages across the country right now in corrections. So this is just yet one way that we can help address and make a better working environment for our corrections officers. And then the people who live there too, the students, the incarcerated people we're talking about, we want it to be safer for them too. And then lastly, you all are connected to education, so you get this. Education has a transformative effect, helps people to develop new identities, perspectives, and goals, and wanted to make sure and lift that up as well. I'll do this quickly so we can get into our discussion. When Pell Grants were first introduced and enacted into the Higher Education Act in the 70s, people in prison had access to them, and there was quite a number of programs that existed across the country. And then in the 90s, and specifically the 94 crime bill, eliminated that access and the programs went away. Fast forward to 2016, and the Second Chance Pell Initiative, which is a waiver, the U.S. Department of Education using its waiver authority to allow participating colleges to offer their students Pell Grants. That was launched in 2016, subsequently expanded several times to about 200 colleges across the country in almost every state. And then that, like I said before, the ban was lifted in Congress in 2020 and went into effect in 2023. So Mr. Addie, I'm going to turn to you first. You work for the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education with the U.S. Department of Education, and you guys work really closely with corrections departments. Can you say a little bit about what that partnership looks like and why it's so important?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here from the U.S. Department of Education. I'll answer your, I'll answer your second question first, Allan. It's important to work with departments of correction on this because that is the location of the work. Those are the classrooms. That's where the students are. Without corrections, there is no correctional education. And so we need good partnerships and strong partnerships with departments of correction to make sure that they're following best practices and that they're good partners when it comes to helping students, finding students, getting students who maybe aren't yet ready for post-secondary education. So that's why, working with corrections is so important, is because this work couldn't exist without them. And then in terms of what that work looks like, we have a couple different channels at the department. One is technical assistance. So we fund a contractor or we work directly with states to help them implement prison education programming, or college and prison programs. So we have people who will go to states, work with states, bring states to DC, hold intensive workshops to help them kind of look what they're doing in their state and how can they improve what's happening in their state. We also have, obviously there's ebbs and flows, but we have discretionary grants from time to time that will go out to state departments of correction, that will go out to other state administrative organizations to help them pay for, implement, or pilot education in prison. We also have formula grants at the department. WIOA and Perkins are probably the two that you all are the two that we work with that you all maybe are most familiar with when it comes to education. And then we also work with other organizations. Obviously, we have an MOU with the Vera Institute of Justice. We've worked with them for, I guess it'd be since 2015, 2016, since I was at Vera. I was at Vera before I came to the department, so there's a lot of history there. But we work with organizations like Vera, we work with organizations like the Correctional Education Association, we work with Jobs for the Future. Just kind of anyone who touches or intersects with the reentry space, with the education space in prison. We try to partner with just, we know some things, but we don't know everything. Vera has a lot of impact and outreach when it comes to working with states, so we just try to work with as many organizations as possible to improve educational outcomes, at least in our office, and I think other offices inside the department, for incarcerated people.
Thank you. Dr. Mosier, I'm going to turn to you next. Given the statistics I shared around the fact that over 70% of jobs will require post-secondary education and training, how can we best prepare incarcerated people for that reality? Double question. And talk a little bit about business partnerships too in your response. Like what role do they play in this process?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Allan, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure being here. In my career, I'm in my 33rd, 34th year in higher education, but came from the defense sector prior, so coming up through career and technical education, I always had that workforce mindset in place in the programs that I created, led, all the way to being president. So education is that lifeline to success for many people. It's a way out of poverty and into prosperity. Of the 70%, approximately 55% of all jobs across the country are what we call middle skill jobs. So that is more than high school, but less than a 4-year degree, which basically screams community college education. Right? Mm-hmm. So we have programs that students can go into in one semester and make $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year in our area. Wyandotte County has 9,000 to 11,000 jobs open and unfilled every single day, with an average salary of $65,600 a year. So there's a great demand. We have a huge skills gap, a huge worker gap, and those workers need to have those technical skills along with the soft skills. So working with multiple entities, with Department of Corrections, with Commerce, with the legislators, with Kansas Board of Regents, our legislature, we've really developed strong relationships. A great example is what we're doing up at Lansing Correctional Facility, and that's a one-semester certificate. We call it a Certificate A in welding. That can lead to a $50,000, $60,000 job just with that alone. We work with business and industry. Zephyr Products is a great partner of ours that we even do internships or externships with our students at Lansing for that. And we're also working on getting the GED going as well. All in all, we have huge corporations coming to Wyandotte County, and it's the same in your communities across the country. Panasonic, we just recruited Panasonic to Casey metro area. They'll have 4,000 jobs available. They need a significant number of industrial maintenance techs. That's the beginning tech. That's one semester. That's $50,000, $60,000 a year. And it goes up from there. We have graduates making $100,000 a year with a 2-year degree. So education is that pipeline, and the number of people who are being released from incarceration per year is huge. And then we have millions of unfilled positions across the country. So this is a great resource to help fill the skills gap and give those individuals an opportunity to have a successful wage and work their way into prosperity, so they don't go back to previous ways of trying to earn money if they're struggling. So it really is that lifeline. I truly believe that.
Fantastic, thank you. Ms. Bosma, earlier I mentioned that these programs can help make the prison environment itself safer. What are your thoughts on that? What is it that contributes to that fact?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here this morning. Participating in a higher education experience is a transformative thing, particularly for incarcerated students. The college experience is not only designed to equip students with skills for future employment, as Dr. Mosier was talking about, but higher education is also a formative process itself. It provides students with the opportunity to learn intellectual and practical skills, such as critical thinking, problem solving, verbal and written communication, and the ability to apply knowledge to real-world settings. They're learning more about themselves and the world around them through the exploration of a variety of disciplines in the classroom. And they also develop a sense of social responsibility. And these things together change how they think and act, and that leads also to better decision-making. So instead of responding to a dispute with violence, educated individuals are able to engage in conflict resolution, and they're able to seek to understand someone with whom they have a different perspective. So then the classroom becomes a place where students from a wide variety of backgrounds in religion, race, class, and culture engage in meaningful discussion. They're learning from one another, and they're also building a sense of community together. Then the classroom becomes a way and a place where they better understand how to engage and interact with those around them, whether it's their incarcerated peers or corrections staff. As students begin to experience some academic success and growth, this also becomes a point of pride, usually, for them and their families and their communities on the outside. So as the students are investing in their own future, they're demonstrating that they have a desire to change and that they want a hopeful future. And sometimes that can lead to reconciliation and stronger relationships with their loved ones. And when they're calling home, instead of complaining or talking about the daily challenges of incarceration, they're talking about the things that they're learning in the classroom, and they're inspiring the people in their community to consider educational opportunities. And we know, for example, that students or children of incarcerated folks are 50% more likely to go to prison themselves. But if their loved ones in prison are sharing about their educational experiences, it can change that trajectory fairly significantly. All of these things together contribute to a better, safer environment for everyone within the prison, whether it's incarcerated individuals or the folks that work there. And it begins to look a little bit more like a rehabilitative model and environment instead of a place of punishment.
Thank you. I want to turn now to just talk about a couple of things that work well and what it takes to make things work well. Dr. Mosier, you mentioned earlier about partnerships. How are partners in Kansas working together to take advantage of this opportunity? You have one of the smaller states, but a lot of college programs already at the table talking about this. So how did that come about?
Yeah, thank you. When the Second Chance Pell was announced, the whole state of Kansas was immediately behind jumping in and figuring out how we can do what we need to do, and working together as a team across the different agencies, governmental agencies, state agencies, institutions, creating the Kansas Consortium for Correctional Higher Education. Those types of efforts and working together as one versus working in competition. You think the community, the colleges and stuff would be working in competition against each other. That just really is not the case. So we have a lot of effort being put in, a lot of support from a lot of different directions. The other is that back to that public-private partnership and the partnerships with our business and industries. The welding example in Lansing is a perfect one. It takes quite a bit of money to set up a welding instructional lab that is safe, and then especially safe and has all the containment necessary in a correctional facility. We have 16 welding stations at Lansing, so you can take setting up one station, multiply it times 16, and then I'll add all the materials. So having those great partners like Zephyr Products, the Dunn family has been very supportive of that. We've had multiple private organizations donate money to start up the program and then to help maintain it. Working with corrections directly, we have a lead instructor, but we need assistant instructors. So we're actually looking and working with those who are incarcerated to become those people that we need. It teaches them the technical skills, but as Kary mentioned, also it teaches them the leadership skills and the soft skills and how to work with people and how to come to conflict resolution if there are those items. It allows them to interface with business and industry. So I think just that strong collaboration is the key. Just working in education and business throughout the years, we just have kind of coined it cooperation. Nice. And I think that's a good way to go about it, because we are kind of competing in the nature of the business that we work in, but we're more successful if we cooperate.
So just want to thank you so much for that. I heard cooperation, consortium in there, but also you also mentioned some things that I wanted to get to in a little bit here around some of the challenges, and so those investments from the state level or from business partners and such to get these programs up and running. So I just wanted to put a pin in those things. I wanted to prompt my panelists too that I want to try to get to Q&A or save time for Q&A. So we have roughly about 7 more minutes to answer the next couple questions. But Ms. Bosma, you have been part of a couple of very successful programs in the state of Michigan. Can you identify a couple of things, one or two things that you think have made those programs so successful?
Sure. To begin, there has to be a strong commitment from the educational institution to provide a high-quality education for incarcerated students. And it also helps to think of this as an extension of the mission that already exists in your institutions, rather than thinking of a prison education program as somehow having a different kind of mission. That allows for easier alignment and administrative and community support. But as Sean mentioned earlier, the partnerships between educational institutions, departments of correction, and political leaders is essential. So state leaders want the positive outcomes that come from higher education and prison programs, but they're wholly dependent on the higher ed institutions to provide those degree granting programs in order to achieve lower levels of recidivism and violence in prison. In Michigan, I'm really grateful that we've had support from the governor to the state legislature for these programs, and that's been incredibly important. It's also important for institutions, educational institutions, to build trust with the departments of corrections, both at the state level and the facility level. The two programs that I've been a part of, I think are incredibly successful because of both sides of that equation. The schools can't provide education to incarcerated students without the collaboration of the Department of Corrections. And the institutions I've been a part of are committed to providing that excellent bachelor's degree experience to incarcerated students. And the Michigan Department of Corrections has really stepped up and become true partners in this, in ensuring that the programs have what we need in order to be successful, to meet our accreditation standards, and to align our program in prison as much as possible with programs that are on our main campuses.
So I want to come back to you real quick and pull on one thread in there. Dr. Mosier talked about some of this sort of screams community college, but there also is a role for the four-year institutions. But you mentioned the state investments, and I just wanted to lift that up a little bit to highlight why that was so important for the institutions that you work for, the four-year level.
Yeah, I mean, we because our programs were donor funded for the first several years, we weren't relying on states to provide financial resources, but we were dependent upon the Department of Corrections to pave the way for us to come inside institutions. In some ways, they were, changing policies or providing the entry point for us to come in, and we really had to learn from one another. They were learning what higher education looks like at a high level, and we were learning what corrections operates like, and then our systems are having to come together and learn to work collaboratively, understanding that we both can't hold absolutes. We have to work in collaboration to get to a point where we can provide those educational programs within the prison context.
Thank you. Mr. Addie, so we're talking about Pell Grants here, but obviously you did allude to some of these earlier. There are other federal resources, but in your experience, what can states do to best sort of braid together these multiple funding streams to support these types of programs?
Sure. I'm just thinking of something what Kary said about, there was a dean in Michigan who said that something that would win an instructor teacher of the year would get them on campus, would get them banned from a prison for life. So there's that dichotomy of what's happening there. In terms of federal funding programs, I mentioned WIOA, I mentioned Perkins, are kind of two streams of funding. The only, I wouldn't say the issue, but those are allowances, and those are ceilings and not floors. So states can choose to use Perkins funds or WIOA funds to pay for correctional education. Some of that Perkins funding can be post-secondary. There are other federal funding streams. The Department of Justice Second Chance Act funds a lot of supports around reentry. The Department of Labor Reentry Employment Opportunities Program funds, to Dr. Mosier's point, some employment, workforce prep, workforce training programs for people who are leaving incarceration and coming home. But the issue is it's a drop in the bucket. The Second Chance Act budget yearly is, I want to say maybe $100 million. It fluctuates from year to year. $100 million is a lot to me, but spread across 50 states, spread across 3,000 counties, it's a drop in the bucket. So those federal funding streams are one example. There have been some other funding streams. The Digital Equity Act allowed Wisconsin, or allowed Iowa, to do more around technology in the correctional setting. And then in Wisconsin, they were using money from WIOA to pay for, I think it was American Job Centers. So some states are doing some interesting things. Michigan, I feel like Michigan is like my first correctional education love because it's where I first started working. Michigan Department of Corrections has these vocational villages that they operate in several prisons, male and female prisons. And those programs are structured very differently from typical educational settings. And they're using Perkins funds from the federal level for some of those vocational villages. And it's like an 8-hour, almost a apprenticeship program where people are living together, they're going to classes together, they're bringing employers from the outside. So they're using Perkins funding in part, but also state funding as well. So federal funding is a piece of the puzzle, but ultimately there's going to be a lot of different people who are pulling at that federal funding. So it's one thing you can use, but looking at state level funding and then other places outside of the Department of Education, as I mentioned, Department of Labor, Department of Justice also fund a lot when it comes to correctional education, reentry program, people leaving prison.
Thank you. And one of the things you said in there too, I wanted to lift up. Thank you for mentioning the Digital Equity Act. Every state has a plan, and incarcerated people are one of the target populations for those dollars, but it requires, again, that partnership of corrections coming to the table to talk to, whether it's the state broadband office or whoever's administering those funds. But this is a huge, huge gap in the space, is getting technology in the hands of people who need to gain those skills. Along with the education comes an expectation that people would also have the understanding on how to operate technology. And just imagine if you go away for a year or two, or let alone 10 or more years, how far behind in technology you'll be when you come home, and how hard it would be to navigate life, the workforce, et cetera. So I'm really wanting to lift that piece up because it's so important, and it's one of the bigger deficits in this field. But we could talk about this with this group all day, because we really love doing this work, and I really appreciate the great comments from everybody. But I do want to turn it over to you all to give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. I was having some conversation with table friends at the Dole Institute last night. They had a lot of questions, so feel free to ask those again. But yeah, I just want to open up. I have one back in the back over there, and then there's one over here.
Hi, thank you. I'm Susan Heegard with the Compact, and we heard yesterday a terrific presentation on literacy, the effort that's underway here in Kansas that Senator Baumgartner and others have been leading. And I wondered, you touched on it a little bit, can you talk about kind of the approach to literacy, the importance of literacy? We learned about it yesterday with young people, with children. But what about adults?
Yeah, I imagine Dr. Mosier probably would have some practical experience with that. And then I know Sean's work sort of funds some of that. So, yeah.
Sure, yeah, thank you. That's a terrific question, because without literacy, education, and further advancement of any part of your life is difficult. So as we move forward, in addition to the welding certificate that we offer, we are adding GED, right? And we have multiple avenues of support for those individuals who are incarcerated, just to get back into the educational mode, the thought process, how to read. I mean, it breaks down to very low levels to help them get to whatever level they need to be to achieve success. Each student in the GED program has an individualized learning plan. We do a lot of pre-testing, both formal and informal, so we can really try and evaluate where they are in their literacy and help develop that plan. And then we have also we have inmate support and tutoring that would take place, peer tutoring, which benefits the learner in this scenario, but also the tutor in this scenario, both who are incarcerated individuals. Then we also teach life skills and readiness. So as they're becoming more literate and they're going to be able to obtain an education and skill sets, that they also have those life skills for after they come home.
So I don't have the statistics in front of me. I was working on a PowerPoint last week that had them, but I want to say 30, 40%, maybe higher, people who enter prison, leave prison with no change in their educational status, no access to education. So there are a lot of people who come in and are warehoused the entire time that they're incarcerated. So what we are trying to do is kind of a multiple avenue approach. One is, as Kary mentioned, as Dr. Mosier mentioned, as Allan has mentioned, education is transformational for people. And the prospect of something beyond a GED, something beyond a high school equivalency is motivational for people who are incarcerated. I can do something more than this while I'm incarcerated. The presence of post-secondary education programs changes the culture of that correctional facility so that now suddenly, you go to a vocational village in Michigan and it feels like a college campus. You go to Kary's old employer, the Calvin Prison Education Initiative, and it feels like a college campus. And it's changing the culture, and that's changing people's motivation and mindset. So that's kind of one approach. Another thing that we are doing is, I'm not sure how many of you all are familiar with integrated education and training. And what integrated education and training is it's a combined high school equivalency as well as workforce prep and workforce training. And we've worked with about half the states in the country so far. And the idea behind IET, or integrated education and training, it's really hard as a federal person to not lapse into acronyms for everything. So I'll try. With IETs is getting more people up to speed faster on their high school equivalency using 2 instructors at the same time to really contextualize the learning for people. So you're teaching fractions, but you're teaching fractions in a carpentry class. So people really see how those fractions apply in their day-to-day work. And so we're trying to get more states to implement these IETs because it's going to get more people up to that high school equivalency level. And just getting states to think differently about how they're delivering education. We had a study that came out I think it was conducted in 2014, which is a decade ago now, the PAC study, and there was a component of that study that looked at education in prison and looked at literacy rates, and there were many people who were incarcerated who didn't meet those level 1 or level 2 literacy rates. So we're thinking, for us, it's the IET piece, it's pushing more people on the post-secondary piece, and then it's also just, changing the culture of correctional facilities to get more people to view them as educational facilities, as reentry facilities.
Can I add just one more thing? I did want to just note that a lot of the conversation around educational opportunities in prison is focused more as someone is getting ready to return to society. And it is important to think also about ways that we can move the educational opportunities earlier into someone's incarceration so that it changes how they're spending their time in prison. And one of the things I think Michigan is working toward that I'm really excited about is thinking about providing a college post-secondary experience earlier in their incarceration time, and then providing something like the vocational village as they're preparing to go home. So you're changing how they're spending their time because you've given them those critical thinking and problem-solving skills, and then you're equipping them with some of those skills for job readiness right before they hit the door. But you're not only focusing on their return to society and abandoning, as you said, the folks that are warehoused and just spending their time if you provide them with some of these educational opportunities earlier in their time in prison, it would change how they spend their time.
Yeah, real quick.
Yeah, 15 seconds. But one thing that's incredibly important around that, because we have what we call the AOK program, Accelerating Opportunities in Kansas. Really fortunate to have Senator Baumgartner with us today, who's a huge supporter of that. So it does take funding. All of these items that we're talking about does take funding. So it takes the support of your legislature to fund these programs. And I think AOK runs through Commerce, I believe, or Commerce Corrections combo. I don't recall, but state funding is, states need to realize how important this is to their local economies and for the citizens of their state and fund it.
Good point. Thank you. Samantha?
Yes, I've got two questions. The first, when you talk, Sean, about IETs, integrated education and training, are folks who are incarcerated also eligible for ability to benefit?
They are.
Okay, great. Is there a but?
We have a technical assistance project in our office that's going to be geared towards getting more states to look at their ability to benefit processes and make sure they're taking advantage of it. But to Susan's point, there's still a lot of people who are maybe not yet ready for ability to benefit, and it's a balancing act in terms of Pell is only 12 semesters. You don't want to burn someone's financial aid up. You want to make sure they're using it productively.
Right.
I know that.
My second question, is we've been talking about prison education programming in correctional centers, but I think Pell Restoration also applied to jails and youth facilities. Have you seen states or models where that's working particularly well?
So technically, people in youth facilities and jails qualified for Pell before. What's changed now is that if they're serving a criminal sentence, they have to fall under the umbrella of a PEP, and the college has to have that designation in order to give them Pell grants. But if they're pre-sentence, which many people in jails are, they can qualify for a regular Pell grant. The problem at least in the jail settings, is folks are coming in and out on a rapid basis, and so it's very hard to set up programs that they can actually complete. And to Sean's point earlier, we have to be really careful about how people utilize the Pell Grant because it's limited. And so a lot of times those types of facilities are better off utilizing other funding streams, to get a semester-long program in place. But there are some states that rely heavily on jails where people are serving, maybe even up to 3 years or more in the jail setting, and those would be ideal places to maybe set up a 1-year certificate program that Pell could pay for. So there's a lot of caveats and a lot of cautions around that. The youth facilities is a little different. Again, they have to be serving a criminal sentence, and so a lot of youth that are incarcerated are actually not serving criminal sentences, and so that it complicates. We really get into the policy weeds here, but I would be happy to talk offline about a specific state, specific scenario, and help flesh that out. I saw 2 hands over here, and I don't. Oh, that one first. I'm being told by the boss.
Larry Tiedemann from South Dakota, and we're in the process of building a new prison, replacing the one that was put out in 1890. So what suggestions would you have if we want to move towards educating the incarcerated, designing now before we start laying the bricks?
Space. You have to build classrooms where they're dedicated spaces for college partners or educational teachers to have the space, because the space is a limiting factor for a lot of programs. In Michigan, many of the programs are only able to offer classes at night or on the weekends. One of the programs in Michigan, Grand Valley State, that just launched this fall, can't add another cohort in the fall of 2025 because there's no space for them to hold their classes. So if you're designing a prison, make education space.
And don't forget about women.
I would just say, build a college and put a wall around it, is how I would think about it.
Oh, my God. Yeah. But I say women because I won't name the state. It's not in the Midwest. So they built a new prison and plenty of classroom space on the male side and 0 classroom space on the female side. And so immediately the college is already struggling to find classroom space to help run their programs. Up front, I think it's Tim. No, you're good? Oh, okay. Tom? I think you were quicker. Or no, you're next to Tom, I'm sorry.
Mark Wiederspan. Just having done some work in the past on getting higher education in prison, I just want to get your guys' insight on one particular scenario that seems very common in a lot of higher education in prisons, is students doing research on papers using the internet. One good example was a student researching prisoner rights, and as a result, I'm not a scholar on this issue, but I think Attica is a perfect example of where you would discuss about that issue as it relates to prisoner rights. And as a result, the prison went into lockdown because of that certain topic that was being discussed. So I guess, do you guys have any advice or anything that you can provide insight on to how topics can be discussed or managed or navigated without causing disruption in regular prison activities? I'm dismayed that that would actually even happen, but I'm pretty sure that happens more than I think, so.
Prisons are a place that have rules and restrictions and policies, and there are some topics that are kind of off limits. And part of our job as educators then when operating inside those environments is to understand the restrictions that are in place and why they are there. So I had a student who was interested in doing an informative speech in a rhetoric class on drones. Well, drones are also a way that people smuggle things into prisons. And so something like that, we had to say, I'm sorry, you can't research drones because the prison doesn't want you to better utilize drones for other purposes. So understanding their concerns, which are legitimate concerns, and reconciling that with the educational and the research aims of your students is a delicate balancing act. And for schools, it's developing a sensibility and understanding why those policies are in place. And then at times, if appropriate, pushing back on the department's inclination to not provide ways of exploring topics and, kind of contemporary issues that we're all debating outside of the prison. So that's why developing trust with your corrections partners is essential, because if they know that you understand and are considering their reasons for having those policies in place, they may be a little bit more inclined to listen to your argument about why a student should be permitted to explore a specific topic using, peer-reviewed journal articles for the purpose of research and academic writing.
Yeah, corrections is very risk averse, and some faculty are not. So that academic freedom issue is a conversation that needs to be had, and when you have a good relationship with your corrections partner, it doesn't mean you're going to get exactly what you want, but it helps get you closer to an acceptable middle ground. I see there are a couple more questions, but I know we're also up against the break here. So I'm looking to our hosts here to see, I imagine we should be ending this, right? Yeah. Yep, so we'll
mill around during.
Yeah, I'll be around and happy to answer those questions offline. Thank you so much again. Please give our panelists a round of applause.
Thank you.